Welcome to this evening's debate entitled Belief in a God, Is It Irrational? This event has been organised by the Ideological Society, which is basically a society which discusses societal matters and organises panel discussions discussing the problems in society and issues in society which are prevalent. I believe this idea of a God has definitely had a profound impact on humanity. So this idea of a God has shaped the way individuals behave. So for example, in a few days, in Ramadan, the Muslims will start fasting because they believe this idea of a God. God has told them to fast. Also, Christians, they go to church on Sunday because they believe they're worshipping their God. Also, this idea of a God has shaped the way society is organised. So in the 12th century, the kings of England would demand obedience from the people, saying that they had been chosen by God, so they must obey him. Also, at the same time, the Islamic State in the Middle East used to rule over the people, and the Muslims believed they were being ruled over by a divinely revealed religion. Also, this idea of a God has shaped the way nations deal with other nations. So, for example, the Crusades were launched, and this idea of a God was used to motivate the armies. Even today, George Bush claims he's fighting God's enemies. So we can see with a few examples here that this idea of a God has had a major impact on humanity. But does this idea of a God even exist? Is this idea of a God simply a figment of our imaginations? Is this idea of a God like the ideas of fairy tales, like Peter Pan? Or is this idea of a God a result of rationally thinking about this universe, man and life? This is the topic of today's discussion. We have with us today Mr. George Ellis, who is from the Leicester Secular Society. He will show how there is no good reason to believe in a God of any sort. We also have with us Mr. Sharif Hafizi, who is a student who just come back from his lectures. He will prove how, when you rationally think about the universe, you come to the conclusion that a creator exists. The format of today's event will be George Ellis will present for 20 to 30 minutes using some of his JPEGs, and then Mr. Sharif will present his argument using his PowerPoint presentation for the same amount of time. Then we'll open up the floor for questions and comments. Now I think this is the most important part of today's session, where we test our ideas against the reality. Today is not a day for charismatic talks or emotional talks, it's a day for thinking. So bear that in mind when in the Q&A session. So if everyone can put their mobile phones on silent, I'll call Mr. George Ellis to the stage.
Right, yes, I'd like to thank the Ideological Society for having the courage to invite me to speak on this controversial subject. And it says in the advertisement that was sent out that I'm an atheist, and that is correct, but it is not a term I normally use. It's one of those negative terms like unbeliever, infidel, agnostic, that take religious belief as being the norm. So I prefer more positive terms like rationalist, secularist, humanist, or free thinker. Now the case I'm going to show is that there's no good reason to believe in a God of any sort. So I need to explain what reason is and what belief is in order to, before I get to God. So I hope you'll bear with me on that. The view that I take is that rationalism is the default position, to use a computer-based term, and that any other claims of knowledge must be based on reason at heart. Worldviews that have no place for gods or superstition go back see if that image is going to come up. No. going to give a little bit about the history of secularism and just the secular society to start with. Worldviews that have no place for gods or superstition can be traced back to antiquity, but I'm not going to go all the way back there and give you the whole history. I like to think that in any community, there have always been down-to-earth, practical people who see the tales told by priests and myth makers as just that, myths. Now, the man who coined the term secularism was born not far from here in Birmingham. I have a photocopy somewhere over here. It worked earlier. Right, I can manage without the images. Let's go without the images. It seems that the system here doesn't work. The man who coined the term secularism, as I say, was born not far from here in Birmingham in 1817. He was George Jacob Holyoake. And he was involved in the Chartist campaigns of the early part of the 19th century for the right of working men to have the vote. In 1842, he was jailed for 6 months for daring to say that the state of the world as it was, the deity should be put on half pay. And for this atheistic statement, he was jailed. In those days, and for many years before, it was extremely dangerous to admit to being an atheist. When he came out of jail, he coined the term secularism, by which he meant a system of moral and humanitarian beliefs without all the paraphernalia of religion. He got some of his ideas from the social reformer Robert Owen, who was the founder of the cooperative movement. And Holyoake worked for that cause all his life. Throughout the 19th century, he wrote histories of it. And he wrote the first history of the Rochdale Society, which was one of the first formed in 1844. And throughout his long life, he died at age 89 in 1906. He was involved in many causes. He struggled for a free press, education for all, the rights of women, the liberation of oppressed nations, arbitration, peace, and so on. All worthy causes and good moral causes. Now, the work of Holyoake led to the formation of a whole series of secular societies throughout England. And at the conference in 1852, there were 22 societies met. The London organisation became the National Secular Society in 1866, and the rest of the Secular Society still exists, largely because we have a building. I just have an image of it. Let's try it again.
If you click the no button, it'll go through. If you click the no button, it will go through. You'll open up.
Click the no button?
Yeah. Let's try it and see.
Oh, you're right. Right, I was going to show a photograph of the second hall, which I don't know if you all know it. It's in Humberstone Gate, opposite Sainsbury's. And on the front of the building, there are 5 busts just above head height. And these show 5 dignitaries of the past. Well, one is Socrates, of course, the Greek philosopher, who taught that knowledge comes through questioning the people and questioning of ideas. Then there's a bust of Jesus, which may perhaps seem rather odd on the front of a secular building. But I think I know the reason why it was done, because at that time two books appeared by German theologians. Strauss wrote The Life of Jesus in 1835, which treated Jesus as a man, and not as any form of supernatural being. And Ludwig Feuerbach wrote Essence of Christianity in 1841, which treated Jesus in a similar way. And both of these books were translated into English by Mary Ann Evans, who you know as the novelist George Eliot, one of the great writers of the last 19th century, alongside Dickens. And she was prominent among the free thinkers at the time, and of course she knew Holyoke. She came from not far from here, near Nuneaton. The third bust on the front of the building was Voltaire, the French philosopher. His satires got him exiled from France to England, where he happened to be in 1727 when Isaac Newton died, and he was very impressed that a country would revere a mere mathematician so highly as to bury him in a great ceremony in the National Mausoleum, Westminster Abbey. Now, the fourth bust on the building is that of Tom Paine, whom most of our members hold in great high regard. He was a working man. He was involved in organising labour and trying to negotiate better pay and conditions. As a result, he lost his job, and on the advice of Benjamin Franklin, emigrated to America in 1774, where his book Common Sense and other writings were influential in the American Revolution of 1776. He returned to England shortly before the French Revolution in 1789. And was inspired to write this very influential book, The Rights of Man. But, he was warned to escape to France for fear of being charged with treason. There he fell foul of Robespierre, and while in jail wrote his anti-religious work, The Age of Reason. And the final bust on the front of the building is Robert Owen, who I mentioned before, the father of the cooperative movement. He pioneered lots of reforms. For instance, he banned employment of young children in his factories, provided schooling, began schemes for old age and sickness insurance, helped found the first British trade union. And it happens that he gave a series of 4 lectures in Leicester in 1839, and supporting the already strong tradition of free thought in this town. Robert Owen had used the term rational religion, and the French sociologist Auguste Comte, about the same time, spoke about a religion of humanity, or positivism. And so, besides secularism, these led to other ethical societies, non-religious organisations, who called themselves, in the end, Ethical Union, which eventually developed into the British Humanist Association. Right, and that's a brief rundown of the history of free thought and secularism in this country and in Leicester. Now, the next thing I want to go on is how do we know what we know? In other words, epistemology. This can be divided into how do we know individually the truth, and how collectively do we know the truth. Now, for each of us, there is the first-hand knowledge that we receive through our senses. This side can be called direct knowledge. We have all direct knowledge of Leicester, for example, whereas I, for one, have not been to Edinburgh, and my knowledge of it is second-hand or indirect. And probably the majority of our knowledge is second-hand. We rely on what authorities tell us, various authorities. So it becomes very important for us to know how much trust we can put in the pronouncements of these authorities. How do we assess what trust we can put in authorities? For many people, it is a matter of assessment of the character of the person, which is all very well, but unfortunately, unless you know the person very well, very closely, you can often be deceived. And how often do we read in the newspapers of naive people being conned out of all their savings by convincing rogues? So, or indeed people being led astray by charismatic religious leaders. The second way that we can assess someone's trustworthiness is by the consistency of their ideas. What they say holds together in a logical manner and doesn't contain contradictions, then we say that they're talking sense. The third and final way of assessing trustworthiness of an authority is by taking other opinions. If everyone qualified in a subject tells us the same thing, then we can be pretty well assured that what they say is true. And a important way of ensuring this is by peer review, which applies in science. But ultimately, the only answer is we have to think for ourselves on anything. Now, how do we collectively know what we know? The basis of the collective knowledge of the human species is scientific method. How does scientific method work? It is a sort of scientific process. We start by gathering evidence, accumulating facts, which we assign by a simple observation, or by conducting experiments to see what would happen under particular conditions. And we try to combine these facts into order, and sometimes may be able to express the relationships between the facts by mathematical equations. These equations and relationships may then be seen to form part of a larger system of relationships which constitute a theory. We can then use these theories to make predictions or hypotheses about other events. We then go back to observation and experiment to test out whether our experiments are correct or our hypotheses are true. Now, this process is a sort of virtuous spiral which continually advances towards better and better scientific or rational knowledge. This is rational knowledge. It can never be absolute knowledge. I did have some nice photos on here of various scientific discoveries, such as the background radiation from the Big Bang, which was discovered over recent years, and which is the main scientific evidence for the Big Bang theory. Looking out into the universe, you can see thousands and thousands, millions of galaxies, and these can be determined to be receding from us at a great rate. And light, of course, travels at fixed speed. The time that it takes to reach us from the most distant parts of the galaxy which you can observe amounts to 15 billion 15 billion years. Well, the distance is 15 billion light years. Now, I was going to show some nice photographs of galaxies and so on, but pass by. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is how does belief differ from knowledge? People from different backgrounds, different education, seem to understand something different when they use the term belief. I use it to mean knowledge which is imbued with feeling to some degree. Now, I take a view which is not shared by all rationalists, that feeling underlies the operation of the human faculty of reason. The way it works, I think, is that in deciding whether to believe a statement, especially one that's going to affect our lives closely and on which we need to make a decision, we weigh up in our minds, possibly subconsciously, our feelings for and against the subject. You can think of the symbol of the scales of justice, weighing positive and negative evidence for the statement. If our positive and negative feelings on the subject balance and are not too strong, we don't particularly care one way or the other about it. But on the other hand, if we have strong feelings, both for and against, this may result in emotional turmoil. This may happen, for example, if we get opposing advice from our parents, or from a parent and a valued teacher. When the feeling associated with a belief is strong enough to amount to emotion, I think we can talk about believing in something. It has then become an emotional commitment, a motivational commitment. Motivates our actions and our decisions. Personally, I would say that I believe in reason. This is not an arbitrary choice. I have good reasons for believing in reason. It's the only sound way to true knowledge. This is in contrast to faith, which is emotional belief in something without good reason. It is irrational belief. Everyone needs the ability to reason, even those whose beliefs are irrational. Everyone's got to get by day. You've got to add up the shopping lists and so on. Well, this is basic reason. You can't go by without reason. Right, that's a description of how we arrive at our knowledge and the difference between knowledge and belief. Now, I come now to the subject of belief in a God. I'm in something of a difficulty here in that I don't know what sort of arguments my adversary here is going to bring forward. So I have to somehow work out in advance what he's going to say and then refute it, which is a bit difficult, as you can imagine. First of all, I'm prepared to make some concessions, though it's probably not sufficient to satisfy religious believers. First, I'm prepared to accept gods as personifications of natural forces or abstract ideals for dramatic purposes. For example, Thor, the god of thunder and lightning in Norse mythology, is quite a good image. Neptune, the fish-tailed, harpoon-wielding, stormy-tempered god of the oceans. Cartoon devils and angels representing temptation and conscience. Second, I I am prepared to accept an abstract, depersonalised notion of God as, for example, the universe, or an ideal of perfect goodness, or even as the creative spark or first cause that set off the Big Bang. Now the problem, however, the problem with the God problem, is all the other attributes of supposed gods that that are attributed, all the other attributes that are assigned to God, to the idea of God. These mostly centre around the idea that God is an actual person, not personifications, not a human being, but a superhuman being with supernatural powers, a super being, a creator with plans and purposes, not just a first cause. Some religions, such as Buddhism or Jainism, it seems, don't actually involve any belief in super beings, at least in some of their forms. So I suppose we don't need to discuss them here tonight. However, rationalism, secularism, rejects all forms of superstitious belief as well as belief in gods. I'll put a hat on this. Now, I could mention prayer, except in as far as it helps you your state of mind. Life after death, spiritualism, resurrection, reincarnation, karma, magic, all these sort of supernatural beliefs. Now, I don't have much time there, so just to make a quick run through of the various arguments that have been put forward or that I've come across for the existence of a God. Now, I've identified three main arguments. There are probably others. We'll see what my adversary is going to bring forward. Now, one of the main arguments is the argument from design. The classic statement is that by William Paley, who likened the universe to a watch and said that a watch has to have a maker. Well, he was speaking, of course, many years before Darwin published his Origin of Species, and the evolution by natural selection, of course, provides a great explanation for the existence of complex life forms. So I should wait to see whether this is one of the arguments that my adversary is going to put forward. I don't think I need to go into all the evidence for natural evolution by natural selection. I hope I don't have to go into everything. Now, another argument is the argument from morality. The existence of God, we are told, is a necessary condition for the existence of morality. Well, I've already given you quite a few examples of people who, have no belief in God and who have led perfectly moral lives. The problem is, I think, that what some people consider to be moral may differ from the answers offered by religions. A sneaky way religions try to gain allegiance is to claim that you are sinful, miserable, filthy wretch, and that by confessing your sins to a priest or to some imaginary being, And by believing uncritically in the doctrines of the faith, your sins will be forgiven and your life changed. And it also helps probably if you put some money in the collection box. They claim that when your sins are forgiven, you will feel tremendous relief. But who is it that's given you this burden of sin and put this pain in your heart in the first place? It's important to realise that there is nothing sinful in living, in taking normal interest in everything in life. There's nothing sinful in itself in drinking, dancing, gambling, sexual activities, or the many other normal activities of life on which the church is frowned, so long as they are done in moderation and with understanding of any dangers involved. Not sure what the dangers are in dancing. I had a leaflet through the post, through my letterbox recently. I don't know whether any of you have had similar things, but it's claimed that through faith you can be healed of terrible diseases such as diabetes, piles, typhoid and jaundice, which are listed in the leaflet. And because very little thought is needed to realise that any such claims are nonsense. The way to find a cure for such medical problems is to see a scientifically trained doctor. Relying on faith as a cure could be extremely dangerous. Now, I need to have time, but I have one other argument which I've come across for the assistance of God, and that is, this is the argument from necessity, or I would say it's purely mysticism. The philosophers call this the ontological argument, with one long words. There are various different forms of it. The one that seems simplest is to say that reality that we see is not the real reality. There is some sort of reality beyond the reality that we experience. This is obviously something that cannot be answered. It is something that presumably you know within your, somehow from intuition, or because you just want to believe it. The trouble is, this is no reason for believing anything. That's wishful fulfillment. Believing something because you want it to be true is not good enough. There must be evidence for anything that you believe. Well, I think that's, I shall stop there. I'm anxious to know what I actually is going to bring forward and how I can formally listen to something.